I am Jessica Mickley. I introduced myself in the big webinar, but I wanted to speak directly to all of you and introduce myself. I am the training coordinator in the Hudson Vicinage up north in North Jersey. I also serve as the volunteer liaison. And I am really excited to speak with you about what is kind of a heavier topic, definitely heavier than what Amanda and I did earlier today. So we'll be talking about neuroscience beyond adverse childhood experiences. And this is a bite-sized version of a much more in-depth, I believe, 3 or 4 hour training that is being done statewide. So I will send you some resources before we wrap up. If this is something that you are interested in and want to learn more about, please don't think that this is all there is on this topic. There is so much more, and it's so interesting. So, but I am excited to talk to you, give you this introductory session. A bit about me. I have been with the judiciary for 2 years now, 2 very happy years. Prior to that, I served on a leadership team at a little organization some of you may have heard of called CASA. Prior to that, I worked for a domestic violence and sexual assault nonprofit, and I served in that role. I was the response team coordinator. So this is all to say that this topic has been part of my life for quite a while. You know, we all have heard the phrase, I imagine we've all heard the phrase, children are very resilient. And while I'm not saying that that is completely inaccurate, it is absolutely a simplification. It's absolutely simplified. So in fact, the truth is that the memory of a childhood experience, it is stored in our bodies, but it's stored in our minds. So from, the first spark of life, right? Cells, from the moment cells are dividing and human beings are formed, these experiences can have a profound impact on who we are and who we will become. And in the last couple of decades, there's been this explosion of understanding, new understanding about adverse childhood experiences. And this is commonly referred to as ACEs or ACE study. And this study talks about why adversity and trauma can actually predict the risks of mental, physical, and behavioral health and productivity issues in a population. That sounds really dark and dim, but the good news here is that if we can predict something, we can prevent it. And so we'll be talking a little bit at the end of this presentation about how we can actually prevent ACEs and how some of this, adverse childhood experiences, trauma, and how some of you actually are doing it already, whether or not you realized it. So before we get started, any questions in the chat? Are we good to go, Amanda? Ready to roll?
Yep, we're good to go.
Let's do it. Okay. So quick presentation overview. We're going to be looking at, very briefly, at neurobiology. We're going to look at some public health research and resilience research. All of this together is how we get the acronym NEAR: neurobiology and epigenetics, adverse childhood experiences, and resilience and core protective systems. All of this research together represents a huge shift. It is kind of amazing if we think about it. A huge shift on understanding individual health and collective health and well-being. So we'll talk a little bit about neurobiology, as I mentioned, impacts on child development and resilience. I do just want to say that some of this can be a little difficult to talk about. So just make sure that after this session that you are taking some time to process if needed, and spending some time with a loved one if you're feeling stressed. So I'd love to hear from all of you. If you're comfortable, if you could put in the chat or unmute if you'd like, what is something that makes you feel safe? This could be a person, this could be a place, maybe it's a thing, maybe it's an item. What makes you feel safe? Maybe it's an emotion. What do we have, Amanda? What makes people feel safe? Amanda, I think you're muted.
I'm muted. Sorry. My home, my family, people I surround myself with, family, friends, my husband, hubby,
Hmm.
home, my
Oh,
family, being at home. Home is, don't hope that, home can be the safe place.
right, exactly,
Cool.
exactly. Now,
Wait, just,
yeah,
my wallet, my phone.
wallet, phone, keys, wallet, cell phone, keys.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If that's in my pocket,
Dog.
I can take on the world.
And a dog for you, Jess.
Oh, and my puppy, who I kicked out of the room so she'd stop barking. But in general, yes, she is with me at all times. I want you to think about that. And also, and you don't have to share this part, but consider the types of things that made you feel safe as a child and how that feeling of safety or security, or maybe, frankly, for some of you, maybe it was lack of, excuse me, lack of safety and security, if maybe that set the stage for you as an adult. The types of comfort that you seek, or the items or the places that you go. Many of us say home as being a safe place or a place that brings safety for us. So, as we all know, safety and security for children is paramount. It's paramount for all of us, but for children, it is incredibly, incredibly important. Before we talk about ACEs, I want to take 2 minutes to talk about brain development. And FYI, all of this research was reviewed, all the brain science research was reviewed by a Harvard professor. So this is not coming from me, this is coming from Harvard. So the central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord, and they work together to integrate all of our senses and information from receptors that are located throughout our body. The nervous system, all together, what the nervous system does is it considers the sensory input, right? So like sounds, sensations, any of our senses, it considers this input constantly. Every second, it is taking in information, and almost instantly, it is responding to the world that we live in. Now, our cells in the nervous system are called neurons, and they are incredibly effective at processing and transmitting information. And what their purpose is, they're transmitting this information, is it to adapt in ways that keep us alive, right? So let's think about for a minute, let's think about a child who grew up in sustained danger. They were in maybe a war-torn country. Maybe they were in an abusive home. What happens then is the stress hormones and the neurotransmitters that are released as part of that child's like fight, flight, or freeze. Everybody's heard of that, right? Those stress hormones and neurotransmitters that are part of the fight, flight, or freeze, they impact brain functioning and mass. And what happens is that the brain prepares for living in a dangerous world. So what I'm trying to say is all of these complex functions, all of the sensory input, the brain and the neurons are adapting to prepare you for whatever sensory input is coming to you. So if you are living in a war-torn country, your brain and body are going to be prepared to be ready for war. Everybody can understand that, right? Now, on the other hand, imagine if you grew up in a calm household, right? You didn't have fires or tornadoes or, abuse in the home. Your body and brain would be prepared for different experiences. So oftentimes you'll see that people who have been through an adverse childhood experience, a trauma, they may be quick to anger. They may have difficulty soothing themselves. They may be hypervigilant. You know those people that like if you walk up behind them without them knowing, they'll jump, right? That's hypervigilance. They're constantly on their toes. Not saying everybody's like this, but that type of response is your body preparing to possibly live in a dangerous world. It's preparing for survival. Now, things get really dicey when biology collides with social expectations. That's where we run into trouble, right? So if you think about it, these kids and adults who were raised in a war-torn country and their bodies and their brains are always prepared for danger, they would thrive in certain situations, wouldn't you think? Like if you then put that kid and had them work for a fire department, he might be great in that role, right? The problem then comes when you put somebody whose body and brain are prepared for danger, you put them in a maybe very safe situation. And the flip side is true. If you put somebody from a very safe and sheltered childhood into chaos and turbulence, right, a riot or a natural disaster, that person may struggle unless they have some very specific skills. So where might this become a problem for a child that has been raised in maybe a not so calm environment? They've been raised in chaos, and so their bodies and brains are always kind of on fire, as we talk about. Where might this first become a problem for a child of that type? Where might we first notice that?
School,
School. Yep,
school, another answer,
yep,
school.
absolutely. So when we ask a child to come, they come to school and we say, sit still, share, cooperate, there could be a painful disconnect there that is really hard for the child. So, the child has to be actively taught on how to succeed in this context, right? So let's talk about the ACEs study. We talked a little bit about how stress can affect an individual's brain and how an individual has to adapt to their sensory input. Now we're going to switch and we're going to talk about populations. So let's look at the effects of toxic stress on a population as a whole. So epidemiologists are scientists who study the origins of disease, disability, productivity, and health in a population. And so we're going to talk about this huge epidemiological study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. What's interesting is, prior studies of health and social effect of childhood abuse and neglect would only focus on one area of abuse or neglect. They might just focus on physical abuse or just focus on sexual abuse. The ACEs study was revolutionary that it looked at all of the different areas of abuse or neglect. And it looked at all the different areas of health and social problems, which was huge. Now, the study started in the 1990s. It included more than 17,000 adult members of the Kaiser Permanente insurance plan. What's I find interesting is that they included people from ages 19 to 94 in the study, that the study participants were generally well educated. Most had attended college. Only 6% did not have a high school diploma, as compared to 13% of the general US population. Okay, so what I'm saying here is they were additionally white middle-class people who had generally really, access to really good care and health insurance, right? So what I'm saying here is that in theory, the population that was studied should have a lot of privileges, right? So the study looked at adverse childhood experiences, which I'll show you in a minute, and the association with health behaviors, disease, mental health, and substance abuse. These are the 10 types of adverse experiences that were looked at. And one major takeaway is that these adverse childhood experiences are incredibly common. So if you look at the percentage of people that were studied who experienced that, that adverse experience, you get what I meant, experience that ACE rather, pretty high percentages. So the first category looked at household dysfunction, as you can see. So we're looking at it asked questions about whether there was substance abuse in the home when the child was growing up, whether there was parental separation or divorce, whether there were mentally ill or mental illness issues in the home growing up, whether a child had a mother who was being abused, physically abused, whether there was criminal behavior in the home, specifically actually whether there was an incarcerated parent that 6% speaks to. Then it looked at neglect, emotional and physical neglect, and lastly, abuse, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. So in addition to finding that ACEs were incredibly common, and I cannot stress this enough, they were incredibly common in a very, very privileged population. The ACEs study also found that adverse childhood experiences are very interrelated. So when there's one adverse childhood experience, there tends to be others. So it doesn't make sense to view them individually. You have to view them all together, right? So in the study, each individual was given a rating or score of 0 to 10, depending on how many adverse childhood experiences they had. Now, it is very normal at this point for all of you to maybe have looked at this slide that I just flipped back to and think about yourselves and think, oh no, I have this many, or I have this many, or this person in my life has this many. This is a population study. So I am certainly not here to tell you that, that because you experienced one adverse childhood experience, that therefore you are doomed and this is going to happen to you. So we're going to look at the population piece next. So people who reported higher ACE scores. So, you'll see the 0 to 5, because again, it's 0 to 10. People who experienced higher ACE scores were more likely to have health and social problems. So as the ACE score goes up, the percentage of people with health and social problems goes up. And that is a dose response relationship, right? And so in this case, where there's a higher dose of adverse childhood experiences, there is a higher percent of people with health problems.
Jessica?
And yes.
I'm sorry. to
No,
interrupt you.
please.
So there was beautiful. There was a question in the chat. What is
Yes.
the sample size of the population in this study, if we know it?
17,000 people. So a pretty good study, a pretty significant amount of people, right?
Yep.
And actually, as of my most recent information, this started in the 90s and they are still tracking the individuals now to see about how their health is and to see, death, when they pass away, longevity rather, which I think is pretty interesting. Thanks, Amanda.
No problem. And there was a comment in the chat as well,
Yeah.
Jess. I was quite surprised at my own ACEs score. We all did the assessment during a training in my school district.
It can absolutely, yes, it can be shocking to think about. It can be shocking to think about our own scores and other people's. But, not that it's wrong to think about it, but I encourage you not to dwell on it because we're going to talk about resilience and we're going to talk about some of the protective factors that work in your favor to combat any of these ACEs. But yes, I agree. It is kind of shocking consistently. I was with somebody when I first did this scoring, and yeah, hers was incredibly high and it was very difficult. So since ACEs, since ACEs do have that cumulative impact on the risk of some of these common health and social problems like substance abuse, like different diseases, like high blood pressure, it's a good measure for how toxic stress affects children, right? So people with higher ACE scores are more likely to have multiple health and social problems, which unfortunately can increase the odds of their children having high ACE scores, right? But as I mentioned before, it is most certainly not all doom and gloom, because part of this research, and this is actually on the newer side of, it's kind of, ACEs has been discussed for a long time, but people are really now, within the past couple of years, starting to think about these core protective systems. And for our purposes and our presentation, we're going to look at 3 of these core protective systems. Before we do, I want to read this quick quote to you from, I believe she's a doctor, Dr. Ann Matston. Nurturing the healthy development of these protective systems affords the most important preparation or inoculation for overcoming potential threats and adversities in human development. Similarly, damage or destruction of these systems has dire consequences for the positive adaptive capacity of individuals. So people understandably get really excited about the notion of resilience because it reminds us that what we do and our actions, that they matter. And we often find, like I imagine most of the people in the room here do, our resilience naturally leads all of us to figure out ways to help our community and our family. And for the staff in the room, maybe that's how we ended up in public service. Certainly for all the volunteers here, I would almost guarantee that's how you ended up here. So all these 3 categories, they guide that positive adaptation. Like we talked about in the beginning, they can help focus on the positive adaptability, going forward. So we're looking at capabilities, we're looking at attachment and belonging, we're looking at community, culture, and spirituality. We know that people who do well, despite having a number of ACEs, that they have these strong, usually all 3, but they could be 1, 2 of these protective systems. So capabilities. Capabilities are include, Amanda, I'm going to ask you for a time check, by the way. How are we doing?
We're at 5:29, so we have until 5:40, Jess.
Okay, good. Perfect. Thank you.
Wait, hold on, let me double check.
Is that true?
Yes, 5:40.
Thank you. Thank you. I just need like 3 more screens and I'll be fine. If I could have
Beautiful.
3 more, I just need 360.
All
You know what I
right,
mean?
okay.
Okay.
I
I'm
got
going
it.
to put
I'm
that
with
into
you.
IT.
I'm with
I'm
you.
sure that's fine. So, so capabilities. So capabilities include for one, it includes developing a positive view of oneself. So a positive view lets me know that I'm important and I'm valuable. And it helps me know that I'm worth asking for help when I need it. Now, that positive view is very closely related to hope. And together it makes it so like, I feel like I'm not going to give up. It is also part of the story of, good things happen to me, not to just other people. Good things happen to me. Then we have self-efficacy, which is the belief that what I do influences what happens to me. So there are simple things that if we're talking about children, we could be talking about adults here too. Simple things that can build self-efficacy. What type of things for children, for example, we'll start with kids. What type of things can build that feeling of, like I'm contributing, I'm adding value for a child, a little kid? What sort of things can be added to help a child build that? Any examples?
Okay.
Positive reinforcement.
Mm-hmm. Certainly.
Positive affirmation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And there are some other pieces, like some concrete things, like I'm thinking about, for example, when I was a volunteer and I served on a volunteer case in my CASA world, like the CASA realm, you know, things like having the child contribute to a simple chore every day, having the child help decide the menu for dinner once a week, like feeling like they are contributing and that what they have to offer, even in the small ways, matters, right? That they have a voice. And for our other programs, it's kind of it's similar, and giving people who may feel voiceless, may feel like they don't have a say in their case, that they do, right? So this is kind of, it's advocacy. It's feeling like, giving somebody the feeling that what they do and what they say matters.
Jess, we had some further comments.
Mm,
Having a good teacher or a positive person in their life, allowing them to achieve something on their own, involving them in decision-making.
mm-hmm. Involving, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, for capabilities, we also want to talk about I want to talk about self-regulation, which is so difficult for children who have dealt with trauma and adverse childhood experiences. It's the ability of noticing our state of mind, body, and emotions, and keeping those under control while we navigate life's challenges. I remember that, again, it was one of my CASA cases years ago, when one of the little girls who never had any trouble in school was acting out. And everybody wondered if she was dealing with, ADHD, ADD, right? And it was interesting because the timing of what was happening on her guardianship case, led me to believe that maybe that wasn't what was happening, that she was just really not able, she was young, able to regulate her emotions. And so she was acting out and because she was stressed. So some of the things that we can do for ourselves, for our family members, for our parents, for our friends, for whoever, our children, focusing on things like belly breathing, right? Or movement, things that get you back into your body. Any type of, prayer if you are spiritual, or some type of grounding practice. But it is very important to realize that it's these are difficult things to do with people who have been through significant traumas and adverse experiences. So we gotta meet them where they're at, because you might not be able to get somebody whose brain, again, I keep saying brain on fire because that's how I associate it with, who is so hyper vigilant, to just go right in and meditate, right? You need to meet them where they are, initially at least. So next, we have attachment and belonging, which somebody mentioned in the chat. It is huge, huge to have at least one caring and competent person in your life to protect yourself from adverse childhood experiences. And the competent piece is important. It can't just be any person. It needs to be somebody who is caring and competent, who can assist with things like emotional regulation, etc. Because providing, if an individual can provide security and a sense of belonging, people will begin to feel safe, right? And lastly, I know we're almost done. We're almost about to wrap up. I wanted to talk about community, faith, and cultural processes. This is a big part of the full length training, so I'm gonna dip my toe in here because we could talk about this for like 2 hours. But allowing, investing in a community, honoring, diverse cultural traditions, honoring the traditions of the individuals that we're working with. If we invest in communities, we can absolutely, help these communities address their issues, right? Address their trauma, which is something that, it's just, again, a whole other conversation. But anyway, we need to have support. We need to have supportive and strong communities to be part of addressing early childhood traumas. And as I mentioned before, ACEs are not destiny. You know, there are plenty of people with a 10 ACE score that lead happy, healthy, and productive lives. And there are plenty of people with a 0 ACE score who struggle and have a lot of negative health outcomes, right? But again, we need to look at these numbers, look at this study. I think this information deserves our attention because, you know, though these numbers don't mean everything, we need to think about what we can do, what we can put in place, these 3 core protective systems and protective factors so that we can mitigate the negative effects of these very difficult, you know, abuses and neglects. If we want to reduce ACEs, you know, in the next generation, we have to make sure that we are, you know, helping current parents, right? Like we need to be able to help adults as well as children to prevent the cycle of these ACEs. So, you know, it's worth thinking about ways that we can all prevent or work on preventing or decreasing these adverse childhood experiences. Because, you know, it sounds corny, but I really believe it'll improve the outcome for children and generations to come. So
I don't think it's corny. I think that it's admirable.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's.
thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
And I am going to absolutely share some resources with all of you, even though you just disappeared from my screen for a second, which is odd. There you are.
There you go.
You're back. So I do not know currently what presentations are going on statewide, but these are the 2 resources that would be your best place to start to look if you're looking for more information about this topic, if you're trying to find a longer presentation. Again, the one that I just did can be 3 hours long. We have our PACES, which is, I believe it stands for prevention or positive. Hold on, now I can't remember, but that is a good place to start. And the New Jersey Resiliency Coalition is also fantastic. They have a lot of resources there. I may have used it once or twice or a billion times in my career. So are there any questions before we send you on to the last session? We wrap up for our evening.
I don't see any questions coming in yet. You are getting thank yous,
Oh, well, thank you.
So
I'm really glad you
interesting and
joined.
informative.
I'm very, very happy to see all of you.
Lots of thank yous, and
Wonderful.
I think we are good. The next session, everyone, begins at 5:45. And that will be our closing section. So at this time, just take a moment. If you need to get some water, and feel free to join the next link. And thank you so much. Thank you, Jessica. You're a rock star.
Thanks, everyone. I'll see you in the next room.